Hi, I'm filming this in June. I'm filming this in January 2023, and it has been a really dull grey day. And I went to the small town of Bridport in Dorset, and I found a camera which I'm going to talk about now. And this camera is a Cine camera, and it's the Bell & Howell 605. Now, I predominantly, as you know, talk about still cameras that you can use, but occasionally I find a camera or wish to talk about a photographic item which I think might have some significance and interest to people. And this camera I was drawn to for several reasons. The 600 Sportsman series was a series of 8mm cameras. Now 8mm was half of 16mm, brought in by Kodak in 1932 as an amateur gauge, and it was a very popular gauge from 1932 until about 1964 when Super 8 came in. So it takes this film, which was 16mm on these little reels, and it's what is called double run. So it went through the camera once, but only exposing half the film. Then when you got to the second reel and the film had run out, you turned it over and exposed it on the other side, if that makes sense. So you get two lots of 8mm film, and then the film is the 16mm was split in the factory to form 50 feet of 8mm film. Now, why this camera in particular? Well, Bell & Howell was a fascinating American company which goes back to the beginnings of movie history. And I think it was Mr. Bell and Mr. Howell basically developed early cameras and projectors, and got very much into the industry, producing 35mm and 16mm cameras. And they were actually going to do, I think, a 17.5 camera, and ended up again doing a 16mm camera, which became highly successful. Now, this camera is a Bell & Howell, but you will notice it has a GB for Great Britain. There was this fascinating figure in British industry in the 20s, 30s and 40s called, well, he went on until he died until 1974, J. Arthur Rank. And he was basically a miller, made a fortune through flour, but was fascinated by the movies and by the movie industry and camera industry. And he bought the rights to manufacture and to work with Bell & Howell. And after the war in Gloucestershire, he set up a factory making GB Bell & Howell cameras. Now this tied in with his other interests, plus he had a lens making company, and that lens making company was called Taylor and Hobson. Now Taylor and Hobson I could talk about till the cows come home almost, because they were a fun, and still are actually, although they are now part of the Cook Group, they were lens making, a lens company, which again goes back to the development of the camera lens, in particular something called the Cook triplet. Now Taylor and Hobson in the 30s took the decision to concentrate on the cinema industry and the film industry. And you might think, why? Because there's so many other cameras about. Well, they realised that this was an industry with great expanse, and that used the top quality lenses and would pay money for top quality lenses. So, as I said, Taylor Hobson, although they did make some fantastic 50mm other lenses for still cameras, they specialised in the movie industry. And they formed a special bond with Bell & Howell and provided Bell & Howell with a lot of lenses, which is why, and the lenses are quite often fast lenses, and they have a certain quality to these lenses. So I was very excited when I found this camera today with 3 Bell & Howell lenses. Now the real jewel in the crown is if you find a Bell & Howell 16mm camera, because if you find a 16mm camera, then it's something called C-mount, which is a type of thread which you can actually get lots of adapters for digital cameras. Now these lenses are what we call D-mount, which is a smaller screw, and there's very few. You can get adapters, but there's far fewer cameras that are actually suitable to use these lenses on. But they are still very good lenses, and these we have here they were made in Leicester. We have a 6.5mm lens, which is at f.175, so that is a nice fast lens. That will be the wide angle lens. We then have a second lens, which is a 1.9. It's a 1. Let me take this off. Right. This is a 0.5 of an inch, which is half an inch, which is basically, I think half an inch is about, let me get this right, I think it's about 12.5 millimeters, which will be equivalent to your standard lens for an 8mm camera. Of course, British lenses often used imperial sizes, and the final lens on this camera is the telephoto, which is a 2.9 made by Taylor Hobson Limited, England, and I'm looking for, but it's a 1.5 inch, so that's about 75mm. And that is your telephoto lens. It's a 1.9, 1.5 inches, 1.9. So that is a very fast lens, actually. Let me talk a little bit more about the camera. Turrets. Why turrets? Well, zoom lenses first began to be introduced in the 30s to the cinema industry. But zoom lenses take up a lot of elements, a lot of different parts of glass are in the zoom lens, and that slows down the lens. With a fixed focal length, you get a faster lens. So these lenses are fast and high quality, and this is why you got up to the 1960s, basically on a lot of cameras, they used the turret system. You quite often had 2 lenses, but the more expensive cameras had 3 lenses. Sometimes there's a viewfinder arrangement. On here we've got little viewfinders by the lens, and when I look through I get a very clear view of the focal length. And that is very clear indeed. So, how do we operate such a camera? First of all, loading the film. You can still get 8mm film, but it's not easy to get. Former, the wonderful Czech company, still do 8mm. In there, through this thread here, and onto this spool here. On the Bell & Howell, the gate closes when you close the lid, okay? On the Bolex cameras, there's a sort of mechanism here, but on here the mechanism is there. So we load the film, close it, make sure it's clicked. We have different speeds. Let me have a look. I think we've got different speeds here. The speeds on this camera are here, and you can set from 8, 12, 16 was the standard for 8mm. When Super 8 came along, it then went to 18 frames, but initially on standard 8 it was 16 frames. So that's the speed of the film. What's the shutter is there, and what's quite nice about this shutter is we have obviously continuous there, but if we put it up we've got single frame, so we can do animation with this camera. So that is the speed selector there. That is the counter to show how much film we've used, and to focus we have no visual rangefinder or anything for focusing, so we have to do guesstimate or measure our distance. On the wide angle lens it's a fixed focus, so we haven't got to worry about that, but on the standard lens we have got to focus and set our aperture accordingly. When I started with film, I used a Bolex camera, and that Bolex camera had no metering, and I had to use a light meter, and that taught me a lot about metering. So focus, aperture and shoot. I'm afraid I haven't got a film to show you, but these are wonderful looking cameras. They can be used, and I hope I've given you a bit more information about the Bell & Howell. Thank you for watching.